Hello! Today I'm going to be talking to you about all the books I read this year and haven't told you about already. I did a mid-year wrap-up, and then after that I talked about some books like as I was reading them, but there are a few other books that I haven't told you about, so I thought we would have a moment for that right here now on this day. I read both Song of Achilles and Circe by Madeline Miller in the last half of the year, but I think I'm going to do a separate video on both of them just because we have a lot of books to get to today and I have a lot of feelings about both of those. The first book I'm going to actually talk about is God Loves Hair, which was written by Vivek Shraya and illustrated by Juliana Neufeld. And then because this is the 10th anniversary edition, there's also a foreword by Cherry Dimily. It's almost like a young adult storybook in a way, featuring these really, really beautiful illustrations. Even though intended for a young adult audience, obviously this can be enjoyed by anyone, and I will just like possess that anything Vivek writes. We've talked many a time about how this is a Vivek Shraya stan channel, okay? This short little book does a really incredible job of discussing race, religion, sexuality, gender, like so many different aspects of Vivek's life growing up in such a profound way. Next is definitely my favorite poetry collection of the year and also related to Vivek, and that is Burning Sugar Poems by Cicely Bell Blaine, which is one I think I talked about when I was pre-ordering books over the summer because I was so excited about this one coming out because it is the second book to be published under Vivek Shraya's imprint with Arsenal Pulp Press. Okay, I know like the cover isn't the most important part necessarily, but hello, it's so gorgeous. Secondly, the poems are also really good. First and foremost, Cicely Bell Blaine is such an incredible person. They started their own consulting company recently. They also are the founder of the Vancouver chapter of Black Lives Matter. I loved so much how the collection was structured in terms of the different sections. The sections range from things like place to art, and there's many different like forms of poetry that are reoccurring through the collection. And by diving into those spaces, they're able to discuss the ways that a legacy of colonization has impacted Black bodies, Black life, Black history, Black culture. This is very kind of like Canada, BC specific, but it just says Chilliwack. It's just a Walmart, and truer words have never been spoken. We have this absolutely stunning book. Wow! I don't really know what to say about this. Like, I've wanted to talk about the work of Billy Ray Belcourt because he's come out with 3 books so far, do kind of like an author spotlight on it like I did with S.E. Dugin, but I just can't. I don't have the skills, the talent, the thoughts to be able to do that for his work. I'm not qualified, okay? And it's okay to just know that and accept it. So this book is called A History of My Brief Body, a memoir, and it's essentially a memoir in essays. So the first 2 books that Billy came out with were poetry collections, and this is a very kind of lyrical take on a memoir, if that makes sense. So one of the things I love about this collection, or well, this memoir, is that it is written like in essays, but also like in fragments. And I very much appreciate that with memoir because like I much more enjoy memoirs that are told in those kind of ways and that they don't even try to be a complete narrative. Also, I do particularly like the Canadian edition of this book because it features this like incredible artwork by Maggie Grote, which there's notes about in the back. This book is also very, like his other work, very theoretical and very much in conversation with so many different theorists in a way that I think is really interesting. So many of the themes that are kind of interwoven throughout the different chapters and essays are on settler colonialism, Indigenous futurity, queer utopia, reflections on like growing up and his childhood, as well as how systems of settler colonialism are deeply part of like every facet of life, including like love and relationships and desire, as well as like an ethic of care in terms of the healthcare system, like all this stuff. It was like absolutely flooring. This is definitely when you want to slowly read through, and I found it was really interesting because there were times where like I did really struggle to read it, but that's something that Billy Ray is so cognizant of. Like he specifically talks about the way that he knows his writing style is difficult and embraces that very intentionally in some sections, but again, very lyrical and beautiful. To move on to the spooky times of the year. The first book I have that I read around that time is The Deathless Girls by Kieran Millwade Hargrave. And I mean, also this cover, hello, like, why are young adult books so much aesthetically better? Like, what? Okay, this is the other beef I have with adult books, is that like this book is so stunning, even just in that like before every chapter, I don't know what this is called, but there's like different illustrations. Why can't we do this in anything other than like young adult middle grade? Like bring this energy into general fiction 2021. You know what I'm saying? Anyway, this book is a retelling kind of the original story of Dracula by Bram Stoker, in which there was reference to the like 3 wives that he has. The author then decided to basically create like the backstory of who they were. The book focuses on 2 sisters who are part of the traveler community, and they are taken, like kidnapped basically, along with the other young people in their specific community, and are taken and basically held hostage and forced into like indentured servitude for one of the boyars. And there's like the whole system with the Dracula and the other like landowner people. Deathless Divide, which I was listening to at the same time and I talked about in the audiobook wrap up. I also think this book did a really good job of, it's kind of like a fantastical-ish setting, but does a really good job of talking about what a normal kind of trauma response to that situation would be. The other book I read in the spooky saison was Bram Stoker's Dracula's Guest and Other Weird Stories. So I mentioned again in the TBR video that this has just been on my shelf like forever, and I picked it up because back in the day when I read Dracula and like loved it so much and like had a whole moment with it, I was like, oh, there's more, like great, incredible. And so I was like, okay, this is the year we're reading all the spooky shit I have kicking around the shelves. There's a lot going on here. There's the one Dracula's Guest short story. There's a bunch of other short stories that are just Bram Stoker's like horror writing in general. So I actually only ended up reading the introduction and Dracula's Guest. I didn't want to read the rest of it because I was too worried that I was gonna get scared and like scare myself because I'm a baby.
You realize the baby is crying.
The introduction was done by Kate Hebelwaith. It was so good at kind of discussing the specific gendered, raced, classed, etc. stuff present in Bram Stoker's writing, as well as other authors that were writing at the same time, like Arthur Conan Doyle. Her story was like fine, it was like whatever. I'm holding on to it because of like the introduction and also because I might read the like novel at the back, but I think this kind of proved to me that I'm now kind of over the like spooky books being like classics, which is what I'd previously like stuck to exclusively. And then I read Dark Water, Voices from Within the Veil by W.E.B. Du Bois. So I picked this up when I picked up the If They Come For You in the Night by Angela Davis, because it's part of the same like Verso Radical Thinkers series. It's actually written or published in 1920, which was right kind of in the middle of his career, which I thought was kind of like an interesting point to read it in. What helped me with the reading of this book a lot was the introduction, which is done by Manning Marable. And one of the reasons I appreciate so deeply is because it's short. My God, these like Penguin Oxford Classics motherfuckers do not know how to write a short, concise, helpful introduction, okay? That shit is a book within itself. I don't appreciate it most of the time, except for the Dracula one, okay? So this, wow, that was a that was a peak in energy I was not expecting.
It's very hard for me to climb down from this energy.
The idea of Voices from Within the Veil is kind of speaking to an idea of like double consciousness in terms of what he describes as having viewed the world from a veiled corner. The structure of the book is that between each essay chapter, there is also a piece of poetry or a kind of hymn or a short story. So it's a mix of nonfiction and fiction. I think it's considered autobiographical because there are, like, even though he is always reflecting on like race and gender and all these things, specifically blackness, colonization, it comes from a more kind of personal place in the way that he discusses it. There were a few of the short stories that did really stand out to me. There was one, it was like a sci-fi apocalyptic short story. It was really interesting to read that kind of a story written in the 1920s, like hello. Earlier this year, pretty much when the quarantine hit, you know what I'm saying, I was looking into some of my favorite authors to see like what was coming out next, because I just needed something to hold on to, you know what I'm saying? So I was looking through the work of Amy McKay to make sure that I just like had read everything that she had published so far. Came across one book I had no idea that she had written, and that is Jerome, the Historical Spectacle, a play. It's published by Guestboro Press, which is why it is gorgeous and the production quality is wild. This is the front. Okay, this is the back. It's a paperback with a dust jacket. Okay, hello. And the paper quality is incredible. It's the best paper quality of any book that I own currently at the moment. It's based on a real event that occurred. Somebody was found on the beach, kind of washed up on shore in the east coast of Canada, didn't have any arms or legs, and was also couldn't speak or chose not to speak or weren't able to communicate verbally with. And then this person became kind of like a whole thing in the area, where there was mysteries about who he was, where he came from, people claiming that he was part of their family or someone's long lost love, like all this stuff. And he eventually just became like a ward of the province. And while Amy McKay kind of stumbled across this story, like she was really troubled by the fact that she came across like a really small snippet in like a newspaper clipping that he was going to be part of a sideshow, basically. This play covers a lot to do with sideshow culture and performance, what a historical spectacle is, what that means, and disability. I enjoyed this so much more than I thought I was going to, because it's a play. Like, even if it's Amy McKay, I was like, it's a play though. Like, I don't think I've read a play since a Shakespeare in high school. Like, what? Because her stage directions are so incredible, I ended up having zero trouble like following the play, and could very much visualize how she intended for it like to be designed, if that makes sense. I have another book by Amy McKay, and that is Half Spent Was the Night, A Witch's Yuletide, which is a continuation of her other book, The Witches of New York. So I tried to read a synopsis of The Witches of New York just to kind of jog my memory about the context of what the story was about. And although of course she briefly like explains stuff in this book, I do still think I would have enjoyed it more if I had more recently read the other book. So I think next year I might like reread them all. Something else I really enjoyed about the book is that every chapter, which the chapters are broken up into the days, so I think it's the 30th to the 1st, December 29th to January 1st, there's like a recipe that's like related to the story, which is just like, love it. Whew, okay, lastly, we have Beowulf, which is a new translation done by Maria Donovan Headley. So I mentioned this in the audiobook wrap up because I listened to the Seamus Heaney version just to get like my bearings and a sense of like what the actual like poem is. So I wanted to read this because it was supposed to be like a feminist translation of the text. She is the author of The Mere Wife, which was like a retelling of Beowulf in a modern context. I very much appreciated her introduction in terms of being very specific about the translation choices she made and how they compared to other translations that have been done, as well as beyond just like the choice of words that are used, but also the actual undercurrents of the story that have to do with gender. I also do still want to listen to the audiobook of this because she's very clear that like this was translated with the intention of being spoken. This video is probably 1,000 years long, but I also just wanted to really quickly mention my top 5 books of the year because I just like don't really want to do a whole like separate video thing on it. And I've already talked about all these before. So the first is Homegoing by Yaa Gyasi. Like, I mean, we've talked about it before, okay? We knew. And then there's also The Chorus of Mushrooms by Hiromi Goto, which I just loved and treasured so much as a book. I think it's like one of my favorite pieces of like Canadian literature. Then we have The Subtweet by Vivek Shraya, which I also love so much. It's probably the book in general I would just like recommend the most. I don't know. Like, I think it's one that's like very easily accessible to a lot of people, and it's a book that I still think about all the time. Then we have Half-Blood Blues by Essie Adujan. Again, just another really incredible book. The voice, the storytelling, like just wow. I think I am gonna give the 5th place to Circe just because I did enjoy reading it so much. And I'm also gonna do an honorable mention for like Anne of Avonlea and Percy Jackson in terms of kind of like children's fiction, middle grade, what have you. That just was such a like heart warming, like my heart experience. You know what I mean? Like I just had they were so touching, you know? That was everything I read in 2020 and hadn't already talked to you about. But thank you so much for watching. I'll see you soon. Bye!